Right, I'm going to talk about the structure in Never Let Me Go and in Frankenstein, and basically ask a few questions. That's what I'm after. I'm after a few questions that are going to be our focus. So here are the questions that I would be asking. When you tackle, if you get this sort of question, and obviously the structure question can take many different manifestations, so it could talk about, you know, how does your writer use repetition in their novels, or how does your writer, you know, use patterns in their novels, how does your writer use the sense of climax in the novels, and so on and so forth. So it could take any different forms, but effectively what they're asking for is what kind of structure is there, and then of course you'll be thinking about how that structure reveals or creates meaning in the texts. So how does it reveal the themes, and therefore basically why has the writer chosen to use that particular structure. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to basically compare the two novels, look at what kind of structure is there first of all. That's our plan. So, in terms of Frankenstein, you know, it's worth considering that neither of these texts have a very simple structure. Neither of them, for example, start from the beginning. So, you know, so they're in terms of Never Let Me Go, it's, you know, she's 31 years old, isn't she, looking back over her life. And of course in Frankenstein, when we encounter Victor's narrative, he's already nearing the end of his life. So something that we bear in mind in terms of context is that the structure of Frankenstein was quite ambitious for the time in which it was written. And as you'll all be familiar with, the idea is that you have a frame narrative, and that's the first person narrative of Walton, who is telling the embedded narrative, which of course is Victor's first person narrative, and then within that the creature's own story of his survival and of the de Lacy's and so on and so forth. And what's quite interesting is that Shelley referred to her novel as her hideous progeny, and you know, that's many critics have said that in fact you do have this structure which is very much like the creature itself, pieced together with different first person narratives, none of them complete, sense of the non-linear, very much like the creature, and that of course is important in terms of the way in which the sense of the truth, you have to work hard, is what I'm going to argue, to piece together the truth and where the truth lies in both of these novels. So in Never Let Me Go, it seems that it's quite a simple structure actually, in the sense that it seems that, you know, you've got the three parts, each one charting a different part of Cathy's life. So you've got chapters 1 to 9, part 1, and that's basically Hailsham, and you've got 10 to 17, and that's part 2, that's the cottages, and then of course you've got part 3, 18 to 23, and that is Cathy's time as a carer. But what's interesting is, of course, you know, Hailsham actually emerges all the way through, and it's, you know, she keeps on trying to throw away this idea of you know, always talking about Hailsham, and then, as I'm going to explain, she's at one point she just can't resist it, she can't stop that pull of Hailsham, and consequently you can see that the structure of the novel and way in which she returns to Hailsham over and over and over is actually you know, part of the theme, if you like, of the novel, of the sense, the importance of memory, the way in which her childhood has actually formed her identity, and so on and so forth. So that is what the structure reveals. At one point in chapter 1, Cathy states there have been times over the years when I've tried to leave Hailsham behind, but I've told myself I shouldn't look back so much. But then there came a point when I just stopped resisting. So, you know, the important thing is that she appears at times to be controlling the narrative. She interrupts the unfolding the story with diversion. She says things like, but that's not really what I want to talk to you about right now. What I want to do is to get a few things down about Ruth and so on and so forth. But what's important is that you consider the verb resisting in that quote that I've put there, in the sense that Cathy cannot control her memories. Her memories seem to control her, and the structure of the novel reveals the idea that she cannot move on from Hailsham, that the importance of that sense of belonging to a place and a community infuses all her subsequent memories. She says, Hailsham was there in our memories. Ishiguro said that as one gets older, there's an illusion that things that happened in the past are more under your control. And sort of what's interesting is that the structure of Never Let Me Go reveals that Cathy has very little control over her memories, and that we make sense of the world as she does, and that we only gain definitive answers at the end of the novel. So it's interesting that you've got this idea, as I say, of her controlling the narrative in some respects, but then also of her memories actually controlling her. Basically, this is what she says. She says, I've been getting the urge to order all these old memories. She talks about ordering memories. So if you look at page 64, you've got those 3 tapes all mentioned on page 64, and then she will then elucidate which tape she's referring to as you go through the novel. You've got, as I say, the Bridgewater tape from the sale, the tape that Ruth gives to Cathy, which is the 20 classic dance tunes, and the tape found by Tommy and Cromer. And all of these are elided, on this page, and then of course expanded over the next few chapters. And that is the argument goes is how the process of memory is actually unfolding. So I think I've missed a okay, well, so if that is why Shelley uses that is why Ishiguro uses that particular structure, why does Shelley do it? So Ishiguro chose the structure in order to illustrate the importance of childhood memories, such as Hailsham, and to illustrate the chaotic nature of memory. So why does Shelley do it? Well, one reason why she uses this sort of very complicated structure of having these several different narrators, all of them embedded into a different narrative, is the idea each time you get a new narrative, you get a new listener. So each time, you've got, for example, Walton has got Margaret, his sister, Victor has got Walton to listen to him, the creature has got Victor, and so on and so forth. And each time, of course, what happens is if you've got an addressee, as it were, you've always got to think about why is the story being told? How might this affect the way in which the story is being told? So, and it makes you think about the way in which the narrative being constructed. So if the creature, for example, is talking to Victor, and his primary purpose is to persuade Victor to face up to his responsibilities, then the story will be constructed in a certain way. So it's quite a complicated idea. So Victor, when he's talking to Walton, his story about the creature is ultimately, it seems that it's going to be a warning against the overreaching nature of ambition and the dangers of overreaching ambition, rather. But in fact, ultimately where we end up is it ends up as an appeal to Walton to destroy the creature. So to that end, you always got to be thinking about how the narrative is being constructed. This structure makes us think about how it's constructed, in the sense that he would paint the creature in that negative light, wouldn't he, if his ultimate intention is that Walton should destroy it. So the other thing is that what you've got is you've got these incomplete, very subjective, as we said, and overlapping first-person narratives. None of them are complete, in themselves, and all of them, sort of, they jump around, and as I say, they overlap. You get different stories told from different perspectives. And what this means is that obviously as a reader we have to work a little bit harder to piece together what the truth is, where the reality of the story lies. So for example, the way in which the structure of Frankenstein works is quite interesting in terms of when you compare it to Never Let Me Go, because we are introduced through Victor's voice to the creature, and we have a perception of this creature as something abhorrent and disgusting and subhuman, at very best. So of course when we encounter the creature himself, we are very surprised to hear the eloquent nature of his voice, and that's the way the structure works, so that our expectations are actually thwarted. And interestingly enough, perhaps in terms of Never Let Me Go, when you think about that structure, it works as sort of in a very different way, in the sense that we hear the voice of Kathy, we hear the humanity in her voice. We might be unsettled by aspects of her narrative, but we basically understand that there are many different features of the human voice that are that are evident in her narrative. And it's only later in the novel that we truly understand that she is a clone, and therefore considered by everybody else in the novel apart from other clones, to be subhuman. So it works, sort of they can compare those two novels very nicely in that respect. And of course, in terms of Shelley's use of her structural choices, by having these different voices running through the novel, it enables us to see the parallels. So if you didn't have these different voices, you might not see them, but while the characters themselves don't recognise that they have parallels, the reader can. So you got the overreaching ambition in Walton Victor, the alienation of all three of the main characters, and of course the longing for affection, which we hear from both Walton and the creature. So that's basically why Shelley went, sort of one reason why Shelley chose that structure that she did. And then what's also interesting, of course, is this sense that both novels have this this circular structure, if you like, in the sense that they don't really progress. So Kathy's left alone at the end of the novel, facing her future of a donor, and as said here, 9 months after the date of the first letter, and make of that what you will. That is, of course, the gestation. I don't have to tell you this, but the gestation period of a human baby. Just saying. Walton writes again to his sister. And what's of course interesting for the A-grade students amongst you, you'd be interested in the fact that circularity is signalled in the text. So you've got actually lexically, you've got repetitions in Frankenstein. So mountains of ice often barred up my passage on page 210. Whereas at the start you had ice that closed in the ship on all sides. And then interestingly, so almost a syntactical repetition. Certainly I can't find any other reference in the whole of the novel to a ground sea, which is heard on page 211, and the first time we heard it was on page 26. So this sense that we're reaching a resolution and there are endless signals. And Never Let Me Go, we've got the same thing. Right at the start we've got Kathy driving around the country, and then right at the end we've got her drives off to wherever it was I was supposed to be. So we seem to be foregrounding this sense of resolution. But I suppose, in a sense, that resolution is unsatisfactory, and we talk a lot about the way in which these novels break through generic conventions, and the structure of a Gothic novel, for example, is that it does have a sense of resolution at the end, the sense of things that, sort of not a happy ending, but it is a piece of escapist fiction, so you do get that clear narrative arc. Whereas here, of course, both of the endings to these novels are open. So Cathy remains trapped on her inevitable journey towards a fate that is laid out for her by others, and in Frankenstein, Walton never does return home. Oh, rather, I beg your pardon. In Frankenstein, Walton does return home, and Victor dies, but of course it's the creature that lives on, lost in darkness and distance, and as I always say to my classes, and still roams the streets of Godalming.